So we're in week five, talking about social cognitive theory. And I know the last few webinars have been a little more structured in terms of questions and things that we've talked about. And I think that's been nice, doing the polls. But we wanted to leave this week a little more open for you guys to kind of ask the questions that maybe you have about the content, if you've had a chance to do any of the readings yet, or to watch any of the videos and maybe take the discussion in a direction that all of you feel would be helpful. So the first thing that we have to discuss is just what are your questions about social cognitive theory? Do you have any? Are there things that didn't seem particularly understandable or helpful, or maybe things that you really liked about this theory?
I'll be honest, I haven't had a chance to read this week's information yet, so perhaps I'll be a little behind in this conversation.
I feel the same way.
All right.
Yep. I'm the same way. I went back and read some of our information on it from our two-day training in May.
Okay.
I downloaded the articles, but I'm just catching up.
Sounds good. Not a problem. Anyone else?
This is Sandy. I read the articles and watched the videos, and then I, of course, Googled it because I always do that. And I found such a great resource on another website that I loved. And unfortunately, you have to have a subscription to it, or I guess I could do it for 5 days free, but I was really disappointed that I wouldn't be able to share it with you guys.
Okay, and which website was that? Do you mind sharing?
Let me get back to you on that.
Okay. Yeah, because that, with doing the course this way and trying to obviously find free resources due to copyright and a variety of other issues, I definitely agree with you. I've come across some things as I was looking for content for this course that would have been really good and helpful, I think, but they were by subscription. So I guess we could talk a little bit about why we included, like, what social cognitive theory is and why we included it, as part of this course. If you guys would be up for that for a few minutes, just to maybe get us all caught up or on the same page, because it looks like some people have had a chance to take a look at the readings and videos and others haven't, which, like I said, is totally fine. So,
that would be great.
Okay, wonderful. So social cognitive theory, when we're thinking about this theory, so we're coming from our information processing perspective, right, where we were really looking at how someone was taking in information from the environment and then acting upon it, processing it in order to encode it into long-term memory would be the goal, to remember it and be able to use it later. Social cognitive theory is also focused on cognitions, so our thinking, but it puts more emphasis on the role of the environment, specifically our observation of others in our environment and how we learn from our observation of others. So one theory that we didn't talk about in this course, but that probably many of you have heard of, is behaviorism. And a behaviorist perspective was really not focused on cognitions at all. It was focused on how we develop responses to stimuli in our environment. And so social cognitive theory is kind of building upon that and was sort of a step away from that. acknowledging that yes, we need to take what we're thinking about or our cognitive processes into account, but that we can still learn from consequences to others. So we can see what other people are doing, the results of those actions, whether or not they are reinforced or rewarded. And that's one way that we can learn or develop ideas about what we might want to do in the future. And so how we are conceiving of this really applying to you guys. And when I think about education, I always think about the idea of modeling, right? And this idea of how do we model for our students the kinds of behaviors or the kinds of thought processes that we would like to see them or help them engage in. And when we're thinking about the Common Core and, even those higher level skills, right, that we're asking students to incorporate into their work, evaluating sources, doing more complex types of reading and writing, how can we use ourselves or how can we help other students in the class to be the sorts of models that our students can learn from? So that is very briefly a little bit about why we included the theory in. When you watch the video, it'll talk more a little bit about modeling, also this idea of cognitive modeling. So you're not only talking about, well, here is, here's what I'm doing when I'm evaluating this website, like, oh, I'm going to click here, I'm going to read this, but you're also talking about the reasoning behind what you're doing, right? So rather than a more didactic approach of here's what I do, it's here's what I do and here's why and here's how I'm thinking about this. Oh, and Sandy, thank you. I'm just reading that educationportal.com was the site, and I think that was a site that I had looked at as well, educationportal.com, that had some resources, but it was you had to have a subscription. Chris, I'm not sure if you're familiar with that site at all.
No, but I will be excited to go and look it up.
And so, Sandy, you said there was 5 days free if you went and looked that up?
Yes. Yeah, so that's nice, right? So you can do a trial for 5 days. And then I'm not sure what the cost is after
Yes.
that. Okay.
It was like $50 a month.
Okay.
Wow.
Which was, yeah, so I didn't know if I wanted to get my subscription now or when I'm doing my final project, or I couldn't decide.
Yeah, and I mean, I don't know, I don't know what sorts of resources you all have in terms of professional development funds for things like that. But I think, though, that the overview, the reading, it does a nice job of giving an overview of the theory, and then also, the video that we did find that I listed as optional is a little bit shorter, but it can at least give you an idea. So Sandy asked the question too, is the teacher always the person who does the modeling? And my response to that would be no, that, certainly there are things that we need to model for our students, especially new things or, something that we know they might struggle with. But there has been research done as well on peer models and the use of peer models in the classroom, both peer models who could be what's known as mastery models, so peer models who maybe know how to do something or could model, the way to solve a problem for others in the class, but also coping models. And what coping models are, and the video talks a little bit about this as well, are students who maybe are struggling a little bit, right? So they might be able to do part of a problem, or maybe there's some things that they can do well, but there's other things that they need assistance with or aren't able to get right on the first try, but they are persevering, and eventually they get through it. And actually, in terms of students who might see themselves as struggling, seeing a peer coping model can be more effective than just watching a teacher do something, right? Because obviously, oh, you're the teacher, of course you can do it. But if I see someone who I can relate to, being able to accomplish a task or a project, that might lead me to believe more that, well, maybe I can do that too. Chris, I don't know if you have anything to add to that.
Yeah, I wanted to say that when we think about modeling, and especially when I was reading through last week's reflections, there were a lot of people who talked about how we forget what it was like to learn. We forget how we processed, how we encoded, what the initial things were that we made connections with. I think we forget a lot of things about how we worked through problems when we were novices, when we didn't already know the answer. And so allowing students to model their own thinking and their own solutions is really important, because often they're able to give their peers help that we can't give, because we no longer remember how we did that when we were at that stage. So it's really important to have your students model for each other.
And especially that there's more than one way to find an answer.
Yes.
So, yeah, I mean, I'm just wondering, for those of you who had a chance to take a look at the resources for today, especially the cognitive modeling piece, because for me, I know when I was first learning about this theory, like, it made sense to me. Okay, we learn from models, we learn from observing the actions of others, and can learn from what happens to them. But I hadn't really thought about the cognitive modeling piece so much. And I think that actually relates to our next question. Do you use cognitive modeling in your classroom? And if you do, how do you use it?
This is gay. It made me think about when I used to teach chemistry, and I had decided that I would teach quantum theory and periodic table before I expected the kids to memorize the ions and their charges and stuff like that. And my thinking was that I wanted them to have kind of understand the reasoning why certain ions have certain charges. And then, of course, they can just look up at the periodic table and also have that understanding. And I did use students to model that when I was doing Science Olympiad, and had so many different teams going that I had students actually help me do that. And I recall one time senior teaching periodic table for me, and I had a student teacher at the same time. And the high school senior was up there teaching the kids who were in periodic table. The student teacher was back at the desk, and the high school senior was going over the periodic table, and of course tying in why the rows are the way they are and everything, and tying that to quantum theory. And the student teacher's mouth just dropped open. We did not have an understanding of that like that high school senior did. And it was very effective for me to have students help out, especially Science Olympiad. So it made me think about cognitive modeling.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a great example, and I think you bring up a good point too, related to what Chris was talking about as well. We never know what what our students might come up with or what we might learn from them, or things that they might know that we don't, or that we would have no idea if we didn't give them a chance to to do some of that process, to take some ownership over what's going on as well. I think that's really neat. I like Science Olympiad.
I really feel that, modeling with the explanation, I've seen many times over that it is way more effective than just lecturing. Greater for student achievement.
I think it can also show students that are struggling an alternate way than perhaps that the teacher would present, an alternate way to look at something that sometimes might help them understand a little bit easier. So I think modeling is really important in the classroom.
And I think the use of multiple models, whether it's paper models or doing a lab, or even maybe even a short video disc clip, student explanations. I think the more ways you have of helping the kids comprehend or understand and comprehend the information, the better. And of course, you always got to be looking at the calendar to see how much time you can spend on it.
Mhm. Yeah, of course. There's always the time constraint. That's true. But I think you bring up another really good point related to social cognitive theory as well. We've been focusing on the modeling piece, but a big part of this theory is just this idea that we can learn things, but that doesn't necessarily mean that we exhibit that knowledge right away in the environment, right? You can learn something. It's called latent learning, right? You can learn something without exhibiting that learning, and that really makes sense in terms of providing multiple means, multiple models, or multiple ways to learn. Even reading something, simulations, right? Taking in that information in different ways, but then also thinking about, well, how are we allowing our students to express their understandings, right? And obviously, as a teacher, that's always something, at least I know that I struggle with. I really feel like my students should have learned this, or I think they know it, but how do I get them to express it in a way that's both meaningful to them, but then that also allows me to see what they have learned, and thinking about the Common Core too, just this whole emphasis on writing, expressing in multiple modes, even using digital tools, or speaking. So how do we create an environment to allow our students to really express what they've learned as well?
Or like Bandera's third assumption, what did he say? But demonstrate that learning until they're motivated.
Mm-hmm.
So how do you motivate them?
Right. Right.
To get the information back out. Goal setting is really important.
And, oh, sorry. Does someone have their hand up? Sandy, maybe?
Yes. One of the things I was just thinking about was how my fourth grade students do modeling for their first grade partners. And it used to be where we would just do reading with our partners, but now we've added science and different engineering activities to go along with that. And it's incredible how the students do use their modeling to help the younger kids.
Oh, really? That's interesting. So you've had, it sounds like, a lot of success with that then, with the the older and younger partner relationship.
Absolutely. We really took some time to show them how we need to model, and make sure they're comfortable with it, and then lots and lots of practice and observation for the teachers going around making sure that the students know what they're going to be doing.
Oh, really neat. Yeah. Yeah, and someone, I mean, I think that relates to what someone had just said too about the goal setting, right? That's so important for that motivation piece. You know, what is my goal here? What is it that I'm trying to accomplish? But even in terms of modeling, right? Or you know, having an older student help a younger student. I mean, you know, when we can't just say, obviously, okay, you need to model for this younger student what it is you're doing, right? Really going through that process and talking about, well, what does that mean? What does that look like? And, you know, what are we hoping that both of you will get out of this partnership? All right. Any other thoughts people had on that?
This is Sandy again. I just had another relation to that. We do student-led conferences in February, and that's where parents come in and the students lead them through different sections of their learning. And we always have a science station so that parents and kids can work together to kind of come up with, and I think usually we do some electricity, and it's amazing what the kids and how they help their parents light a light bulb or make a circuit or anything like that. And it's been really enjoyable to watch them do that.
Oh, neat. That's really cool. I mean, you know, and I would think it would be empowering for the students to be able to do that. And I don't know, I'm just thinking of myself as a parent. I would love to come to something like that and, you know, be able to see my daughter being able to walk through the process and show me something like that.
I've sort of used it in my 7th grade classroom to a certain extent, where I ask the students to rank what their understanding, their personal level, what they think their understanding is of a concept, and they'll break up into different sections in the room, and the students that are sort of at a basic or below basic level will pair themselves up with somebody who thinks that they're proficient. And it's pretty interesting because we do the same kind of self-evaluation afterwards to see, okay, where are you now? Mm-hmm. And a lot of times the proficient students will actually come back down, like to the advanced or maybe to the basic, saying, I thought I understood it, but when I tried to explain it and help model it, I really realized I was missing a part. Mm-hmm. So I think it helps with like self-reflection and where they're at in the learning process.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, that's a really good point, and that's something I've definitely learned throughout my time as an instructor and teacher as well, right? You never, one of the best ways to learn something or to figure out that you don't know something as well as you thought you did is to try to teach it to someone else. Yeah, definitely.
Absolutely.
So I think too, I mean, a lot of what we're getting into here also will apply next week when we talk a little bit more about social constructivism and scaffolding, and especially a lot of what you're talking about with the older peer models, the partnerships, also thinking about how we can use those to effectively scaffold or support our students, because, as we'll talk more next week, obviously, as you have a classroom of many different students who are at very different levels, some of them in terms of what they can and can't do. And I think this modeling piece really fits nicely into that when we think about, well, how can we help our maybe our a little more advanced students to support students who may need help without, I don't want to say bringing them down, but you know what I mean. making it a relationship that is helpful for both parties. And I think this focus that we've had on modeling and teaching our students how to be effective models, or, you know, effective teachers essentially, can be a really useful way to look at that, because then, you know, as we were just saying, well, by teaching something to someone else, I'm also discovering, well, what don't I know as well, and what do I need to work on? So I really like that connection here that we've been making. Okay. It looks like we have about half an hour left, and certainly we don't need to use the whole time, but I did have one more question, unless people had other comments that they wanted to make about this. Okay, so the last is really, do you want to know, or what do you want to know more about from this week's topic? And, you know, again, I know that not everyone has had a chance to look at everything, and that's fine, but we really, you know, are kind of just scratching the surface a little bit of social cognitive theory and are focusing primarily on modeling. Was there anything else that anyone has heard about or read about that we haven't talked about, or that you think might be helpful to know about social cognitive theory? So one thing that I want to mention, if no one has anything off the top of their head, and feel free to jump in if you think of anything, is also that another emphasis of social cognitive theory is on this idea of self-efficacy. Albert Bandura talks about it. There's work by Barry Zimmerman is another person who's done a lot of work in this area and related to self-regulation. But thinking about self-efficacy in terms of what it means for our learning. So self-efficacy really boils down to whether or not we think we can do something. It's different from ideas of like self-esteem, self-concept. Those tend to be more global. You know, how do I feel about myself in general? Self-efficacy might be something like, you know, oh, I feel like I'm really good in physics. Or, you know, I hate it when I hear people say things like, oh, I'm just not a math person, right? I'm just not good at math. And I think thinking about self-efficacy can be a really important component of science, and also literacy in science, right? So if someone is thinking, well, I'm just not very good at science, I'm not a science person, or, you know, I'm not a good reader, I'm not a good writer. And, you know, how does that conception affect both their ability to do science, but also to do the reading and writing and speaking and listening that the Common Core is now has a focus on? And I just wondered if any of you maybe have thoughts or opinions or experiences with self-efficacy in the classroom.
I think it's important to let students know that a lot of times to get to the point where you do feel like you're better at something, you have to have practice, and to remind them of that constantly. As seventh graders, they come in with these notions of, well, you know, I've always been bad at science. Well, what I initially say to them is, this is, what was that?
Oh, I think it might have been some background.
Oh, okay. But I just tell them that it's brand new and they haven't had, you know, life science before, and what fun to learn something new, and everybody needs practice. And if I just continually remind them, oftentimes they will kind of come around and say, well, I'm a lot better at science than I thought. Mm-hmm. And so sometimes it just takes a little bit of continually talking to them about that. that you aren't going to just come into something that's brand new and be awesome at it.
Mm-hmm.
So, and they just don't have that self-awareness at that age that they can get to that point without, somebody sort of directing and leading them there.
Mm-hmm.
I think that we as teachers also have to praise those students. For example, if girls think that they can't do math or they can't do science, I think we have to really be thoughtful of how we react to that, and not saying, like, oh, you've got 71%, the end of the quarter is next week, you're probably going to pass, so, not to worry about it. I think we should not be saying things like that. I think we need to be saying things like encouraging them to do the work, and that they can do the work, and that you're there to help them do the work, and we'll try it in different ways. And I think that ends up helping their self-efficacy develop, so to speak.
Yeah.
I think over the years, a lot of times, sometimes we as teachers have said the wrong things to kids, like, having an understanding that they can't do something, when in fact, if they tried it and worked at it, they probably could. And maybe I shouldn't even say probably there, they could.
I agree.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think you hit on a good point there too. And then Sandy brought up this idea of, self-efficacy relating to this idea of grit, which I know is getting more and more acknowledgement. And then, talking about this idea of struggle. I think so often students feel like, well, if I struggle, that must mean that I'm not good at it, or that I can't do it, or that I'm not smart because I'm struggling, when actually, struggle is a good thing. I mean, it's a part of learning, failure is a part of learning. And I feel like we're acknowledging that much more now. And, hopefully creating spaces allowing students to fail and learn from those failures. And again, that can kind of be a place where those coping models can help, right? Where, okay, this didn't work, or I failed at this. What am I now going to do to try and do better next time? Okay, I see hands up again. Sandy, did you have something?
I do. It was relating to even how I group students, and thinking about that self-efficacy. One of the, like I talked about before, having them light a light bulb with just a bulb and a wire and a D cell. And I noticed that if I have them in groups, that the boys will try to, not always, but sometimes the boys will just try to show the girls how to do that, how to, oh, here, you do it like this. And I was doing some teacher training, and it happened even with the men in the group. We're trying to just show the women, and they would just let them, oh, here, just show me. They wouldn't keep working at it. And I really had to get after them and say, we have to help kids figure it out themselves. We can't just always just show them. They need to develop that perseverance, and then knowing, oh, I can do it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's really interesting, actually, that was happening in the teacher training as well, and I mean, just in terms of thinking about, well, obviously it's happening in the classroom. If it's happening there, that's interesting.
I think it happens with students that that look to, quote unquote, the smart kid, especially when they're working in groups. And I really strongly encourage kids to, especially if they are sort of somebody who gets it a little bit quicker, to not give them the answer. And I'll talk to them like, hey, if you do, maybe you stand back and say, well, I think I understand it, but I want to see what you guys come up with. And sort of doing a little bit of that, so that everybody sort of has to struggle and grapple with that idea until they come to it on their own, rather than just have somebody show it to them.
Yeah, I mean, that's a really good point. It just made me think of something that I see in the classroom with, like you said, the quote unquote, I don't even want to say smart, but maybe the kids that, people look to for the answer a lot of times. And,
Right.
that I hear them saying, oh, we just want to get done. Just write this down. This is it, just ask so-and-so. And so too, I think with the modeling component and using the peer models, we do need to be careful to make sure like, one person isn't always the peer model, right? Everyone is getting a chance to show, how they do something or how they would approach it, or, so to kind of try and get away from that. Well, I'm always going to look to this person to know what I should do. Other thoughts? I see Gay and Sandy with hands up, but I don't know if that is from before or if you had something to add.
Sorry, that was from before.
Okay. Oh, no problem.
Before two for Gay.
Okay. Ooh, and Heather, thunderstorm, protect your garden from hail. Yes, definitely a good thing to do. I feel like this has been a really good conversation, and I think, like I said, a lot of what we've been talking about this week will feed into ideas for next week when we're thinking about supporting our students, and not just as teachers supporting students, but also how can we help our students to support each other. So I would encourage you to keep thinking about these things as you're going through the content for next week on social constructivism. Did anyone have anything they wanted to add about social cognitive theory? Because if not, okay, yes. So the next thing I was going to do was to ask if anyone wanted to ask questions about any of the assignments, either the resource sharing or the final project. So Bonnie said she would like to clarify the type of resource we're supposed to share for the resource sharing assignment. It's pretty open. Basically, what we're hoping is that you will share a resource that you feel relates to the theories that we've been talking about, and something that can maybe help others in the course to also focus on the Montana Common Core standards, and trying to help meet those in the classroom. So it could be a website. It could be I know we put up the rubric sharing. If you wanted to share a rubric and just do a little bit more of a write-up for that, for the resource sharing, it could be a rubric. It could be a particular assignment that you found worked really well, maybe a video. It's very open. Did anyone have specific examples of things that they wanted to ask about, or was it just in general? Because it's pretty varied depending on what's been helpful for you. Did that help, Bonnie? Okay, yes. Great. I think we got that cleared up. Did people have other questions about that? All right. How about the final project? Any questions about that? If not, that's totally fine. Chris did post some really helpful videos about those assignments. So if you haven't had a chance to check them out, I would suggest doing that. And certainly if any questions come up, feel free to send us a message or ask at the webinar next week. Okay, well, did anyone have anything else? Otherwise, I think we'll wrap up for today a little bit early. Okay, well, it's been lovely chatting with all of you today, and we will talk with you next week.
Thank you, Sarah.
You're welcome.
Thank you.
You're welcome.